Well, if Boris Johnson was hoping that the initial report into lockdown parties in Downing Street would draw a line under the scandal, he was clearly mistaken. The summary of findings by Sue Gray, a senior civil servant, is heavily critical of Number 10, and a growing number of Conservatives have been openly hostile to the Prime Minister, despite his apology and his promise to look in the mirror and learn. Now, the report says at a time when ministers were asking citizens to severely limit their lives, some of the behaviour surrounding the gatherings is difficult to justify, and some events clearly should not have been allowed. It goes on to identify failures of leadership and judgment in parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office in Whitehall. Some staff said that they had wanted to raise concerns about the gatherings, but they had felt unable to do so. Well, after increasingly vocal demands by senior Conservative MPs today, the report will now be published in full after the police investigation into possible criminal behaviour has been completed. It's thought that detectives have obtained hundreds of photos of alleged gatherings in Number 10 and Whitehall as part of their inquiry. Today, Boris Johnson, over in the House of Commons, addressed his MPs in a private meeting, trying to fend off more calls for him to step down. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, reports on the day's events.
It's been a long, uncomfortable wait for Number 10. An official verdict into the government itself breaking the rules. Part 1, at least, has now arrived.
Will you take responsibility, Prime Minister?
There may be no easy Downing Street escape. The blonde head and red box you can spot from the sky, arriving for a moment Boris Johnson's enemies believe could be a reckoning.
Prime Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
He started with another apology.
Firstly, I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard. This pandemic was hard for everyone.
His penance, though, not changing his own address, but shifting others around.
Mr. Speaker, it isn't enough. This leader of the opposition, a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, so he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker. He, Mr. Speaker, chose to use this moment. He used this moment, Mr. Speaker, continually to prejudge a police inquiry. That's what he chose to do. He's reached his conclusions about it. I'm not going to reach any conclusions, and he would be entirely wrong to do so. to say sorry. This is a moment when we must look at ourselves in the mirror, to do, Mr. Speaker, and the job that this government was elected to do. Mr. Speaker, I get it, and I will fix it.
The findings are grim for Downing Street. Ms Gray found a serious failure to observe the high standards expected, with too little thought given to what was happening across the country. There were failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. She found excessive consumption of alcohol that's not appropriate in a professional workplace at any time. And some staff who'd wanted to raise concerns about behaviours felt unable to do so. This may not be the full and final version, but the conclusion is clear. A number of these gatherings should not have been allowed to take place or to develop in the way they did. And remember, this is only the initial report into what's emerged week by grisly week about what was going on behind the closed door of Number 10.
It wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Jokes about explaining away the rules.
This fictional party was a business meeting.
Cheese and wine in the garden. Claims of loud music and parties in the flat upstairs. Birthday cake in the cabinet room. The rule setters alleged to be rule breakers, while the rest of the country was locked down. In contrast to the Prime Minister's seeming hope to rush through this statement this afternoon, the Leader of the Opposition was brutal and took his time.
Of the political thing they are in, they are still part of that system being shown to us. So it's all a bit crazy to kind of work out what all this is about. Because, what? Everybody, Biden goes, the whole world's saved. When you see how much is abandoned, they're not saving anything. They seem to be running the national health down here, and then changing everything. I mean, if you're really into all this, you'll just go insane because you won't know whether you're coming or going because it changes so much. But you know, there are so many places, schools, hospitals, towns, just from hundreds of years ago, all abandoned. And, you know, never ever talking about any of that and just pretending we live in this. It's a meta life we live in. Once you get on these screens, once you're watching this stuff, you're in meta. And we all know what meta is. It's not real. Anyway, let's watch Josh's video, but just remember, when you think you are hearing what the people are saying, you're not. They've just put those voices on top of another piece of footage and are saying this is what they're saying. You have no proof watching this that any of the people said what the media said that's going on. And they've stuck all that on top. Anyway, let's continue and watch this video with Josh's. Thank you, Josh.
It's an unbelievable moment.
Brandon, you also told me you can hear the chants from the crowd. Let's go, Brandon. And you told me you were going to kind of hang back those two stages and just watch and learn what learn that helped you there in those closing laps.
Oh my God, it was learning how line didn't stay to and everything shifted top to bottom so much.
Anti-Joe Biden chants have erupted at the NASCAR Talladega Superspeedway event in Alabama. The video shows winner Brandon Brown giving his post-race interview after banking his first NASCAR Xfinity Series race. The NBC Sports interview can see the reporter telling Brown the crowd is chanting, "Let's go Brandon." But that wasn't the case. Crowdgoers were chanting anti-Biden rhetoric. When it was clear what the crowd was chanting, NASCAR took down the interview on Twitter. Just last week, a similar situation occurred at a congressional baseball game in Washington, D.C. President Biden attended the event. Most of the crowd welcomed him, but there were a few who booed him.
Joe, you suck!
chanting from the NASCAR event happened at college football games where fans turned political.
Joe Biden! 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 Biden! Joe Biden! Joe Biden! Joe Biden!
College football fans from around the United States have continued the viral trend of chanting against their president.
By routinely breaking the rules he set, the Prime Minister took us all for fools. He held people sacrificing contempt. He showed himself unfit for office. Prime Minister, the British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign. Of course he won't, because he is a man without shame.
Some ministers hung their heads as the Labour leader appealed to them, to their Tory colleagues, to call time on the Prime Minister. Labour claims he's now simply not fit to govern.
They can heap their reputations, the reputation of their party, the reputation of this country on the bonfire that is his leadership. Or they can spare the country from a Prime Minister totally unworthy of his responsibilities. The eyes of the country are upon them. They will be judged by the decisions they take now.
In all the sound and fury at Boris Johnson, the SNP breaking Commons manners.
He misled the House. He must now resign.
Finding him a liar.
That man has misled the House.
A wild ride in the Commons.
Shut up.
Downing Street had hoped the danger was passing. Boris Johnson's lieutenants trying to grab control and shore up angry MPs.
Have you seen Sue Gray's report, Mr Dowden?
But attacks on Number 10 from the Tory side were opened by none other than the withering former Prime Minister.
Either my right honourable friend had not read the rules, or didn't understand what they meant, and others around him, or they didn't think the rules applied to Number 10. Which was it?
I'm deeply concerned by these events, and very concerned indeed by some of the things he has said from that dispatch box. And I have to tell him he no longer enjoys my support.
It seems a lot of people attended events in May 2020. The one I recall attending was my grandmother's funeral. I didn't hug my siblings, I didn't hug my parents. I gave a eulogy, and then afterwards I didn't even go to her house for a cup of tea. I drove back 3 hours from Kent to Staffordshire. Does the Prime Minister think I'm a fool?
No, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable friend, and I want to say how deeply I sympathise with him and his family for their loss.
Disbelief on the faces of some of Boris Johnson's own side. Despair across much of the Tory party. Fatigue, perhaps too, at weeks and weeks of this mess. But there is not yet a resolve to see the back of the man who won a historic majority, with a promise of change. Not tonight, not yet.
And here in Downing Street tonight, Laura's joined me. Two things, Laura, maybe that viewers are mostly focusing on, and maybe we can talk about now. The power in this very brief report and what that means, and of course, where it leaves Boris Johnson at Number 10 tonight.
Well, first of all, in terms of the report itself, and we'll just keep an eye on that car, who knows who it will be delivering to Downing Street here tonight. In terms of the report itself, it's not so long ago that actually Boris Johnson was standing in the Commons saying, well, I think everything was fine in Downing Street. I think all the guidelines were followed. And yet here we are, a couple of months later, with an official verdict in black and white. This report may only have been 12 pages long, but it had one big, difficult, damning conclusion that there was rule breaking at the top of government while millions of us were following the rules locked down during a national emergency. Now the police will investigate, and several events that the Prime Minister himself was at will be part of those investigations. Now there is no world in which that is not something that is serious, difficult and damaging for Downing Street. That is absolutely clear. Boris Johnson, though, has promised his MPs tonight that he will make changes, and it will be up to them now to judge in the coming days and weeks whether or not he is able to get through this. Now, his allies in the last few days have done a lot to try to shore up support. There isn't necessarily a belief that that's suddenly falling away. There's no suggestion that the dominoes are all about to fall. But one former senior minister did say to me tonight, there's no question in their view, and I think a lot of MPs would agree with this, that because of the nature of what's come out today, again, an official verdict, the Prime Minister does close today weaker than he was this morning.